Welcome to the North Group Podcast. We explore the ideas that shape great leadership, sharing stories, insights, and strategies to help you lead with purpose and clarity.
Welcome to the North Group Podcast. My name is Gina Breslin, and today I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Josh Kiefer and Sally Redeman. And we're going to talk about strategic planning. And so I thought I would kick us off with a quote by Abraham Lincoln. And the quote reads like this: "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." What thoughts does that prompt? Does that connect to strategic planning?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say definitely
For sure.
connects to strategic planning. I think even in hearing the quote, the first thing that would come to mind is that he was alluding to the idea of having a strategy, right? Thinking through, being intentional about, if I'm going to chop this tree down, how do I do it most effectively? How do I do it most efficiently? Whereas I think in strategic planning, that's one of our main goals, is being intentional.
Right.
Tyranny of the urgent is going to reign supreme inside of all of our organizations. And so how do we step back from that, figure out what's the axe we need to sharpen, and how are we going to do it?
Yeah. So when we think about this idea of strategic planning, because we get inside all sorts of organizations who would think about strategic planning in different ways, what are some of the ways in which we see these differences show up? Like if someone says, hey, we want help with strategic planning, like it's not just like a rinse repeat, right? So what are some of those differences that we would see?
Yeah, well, I think some organizations really get the idea of it, where the goal is to create a plan for the organization based on your foundational principles, your vision, your mission, your core values, and where do we want to be in a given period of time, whether that's 1 year, 3 years. That's typically what we see anymore. But some organizations really are thinking about it almost like a business plan, which is not how we view it. A business plan is much more like in the weeds of the operational components that might be part of executing a strategic plan, whereas we're thinking bigger picture and, how are we setting those core, priorities.
And we would also see, I'm thinking, so Josh, jump in here, but maybe not everyone starts with the idea of vision, mission, values, like why do we exist? How do we behave?
Yeah.
I'll get back to my question in a minute, but what's the advantage of starting with those guiding principles?
Keeping our mission, vision, values in mind. You mean, that's, this is maybe oversimplifying it, and you guys can jump in here, but sometimes when I think of strategic planning, I think of it in terms of kind of 3 main areas. So thinking long-term, where are we going? And second part is, and why does it matter that we're going there? And so for our team, okay, we can have a strategic plan, but why does it matter? Why should that be our long range goal or objective? And then the third part, I think, is often actually what we think about with strategic planning, which I think gets after your question, Gina, which is, and then how are we going to get there? But too easy it is to start at the end.
Right.
Kind of like, okay, well, we all know where we're starting, right? Let's start putting a plan together of what should we do in order to get somewhere different. But I think that going back to those foundational principles of mission, vision, values actually help us to stay oriented to those first 2 questions of like, well, wait a second, we're not going somewhere new, right? What is our vision? And does this strategic plan, if we imagine who we are, where we're going, how we do what we do, line up with that? Because then that has to answer that second question too of, I think strategic plans, often people are wondering, are they haphazard? If I'm an employee, how am I a part of that or not? And so why does it matter that that's where we're heading? Well, our core values should line up too with, hey, this is consistent with who we are. This is consistent with what we've said that we do and where we're going overall. And so there's continuity, I think, inside of an organization to start with those foundational pieces and incorporate them into the strategic plan, because then we can answer that, last question of, and how are we going to get there? Like, who needs to do what? What's the time frame? That's all great. But if we haven't answered the first two, or it feels inconsistent in some way.
Yeah.
There's also a big assumption that we are starting from a common understanding of where are we even at to begin with. And so that even creates alignment around, we can assume that we're all on the same page, vision, mission, core values, or whatever your other foundational principles are. But we don't know that unless we actually talk about it. And are we in alignment? This is what exists. Is this still what's important? Or, hey, we haven't taken a look at this for a long time. Do we need to start here and make sure that we're on the same page before we can figure out where we're going next?
When I think of some of the strategic planning that I've been involved in, and I think about the ones that have been just super successful, even with hard topics on the table, or even with like dissenting voices or opinions, when that alignment is there, when we know, again, this is why we exist, or this is our purpose, this is how you behave inside our organization, again, or our core values, it's a game changer. It makes all the difference. Yeah. So the question that I started with, which I got a sidetracked from, was just like, when people come and think about strategic planning, they often have really, or they can have different thoughts and approaches, even the whole way down to, like Sally, you mentioned time frame. Like some people would say, oh, we have a 1-year business plan and that's our strategic plan. Well, is that appropriate? We could talk a little bit more about that. Are there other pieces that you think of beyond time frame that people, when they think about strategic planning, just might come to North Group and be, at different places?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we have to recognize in the landscape of business or nonprofits or anywhere is that strategic planning has become such a huge topic that there's many different processes that people have. Some of them are very rigid processes. Some are much looser and free-flowing. One's not necessarily right or wrong, but based on our experiences, based on our preferences, I think a lot of people show up, and when they're thinking of strategic planning, they probably have a bit more of a clear picture of what their expectation is, maybe even than what they realize. And part of that probably has to do with process. What are my expectations of, like, hey, I'm thinking of one client who would be like, can we knock this out in 4 hours? And that's strategic planning. And another client who would think, man, we got to have at least 3-4 days minimum. And how many voices should we include? Again, not even saying that one's right, one's wrong, as much as I think that can be a big place of difference, is where we're starting from an expectation on what is the process to come up with a strategic plan.
And I would add to that two more things. One is just simply around the language. Is it an objective? Is it a goal? Is it an action step? Is it a strategic direction? Is it a strategic initiative? Like when you, especially I think of nonprofit organizations where you have a board and people are coming from all different walks of life to participate on that board, they've all likely experienced strategic planning. And then you take that one step further and their expectations of what the end result could look like, can be very, very different. So let's step back for a little bit. Like, why does strategic planning matter? Like, why is it important? I mean, we know in today's world, you got to be fast, right? You need to be on your A game. But why take a step back?
Well, you mentioned it early on where you said we can get caught up in the tyranny of the urgent and the moment. And so if we do not spend time focusing on what really are our priorities, if that's where we want to be down the road, down there, and we have to determine and specify that, and then we build a plan around that. But if we don't identify it, we're always going to get caught up in what's happening today or this week that feels most important, but it's really probably just the urgent. And so the strategic plan continues to keep us focused and drive us on, okay, we said that these things are important. How do we keep them at the center? And we may have lots of distractions that come in. Some things we have to address. Sometimes we have to pivot. But at the core, it keeps us, really focused as a team. One, we said these are priorities. We have to keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Well, and I love within that, and you're certainly inferring it, that it moves us away from that kind of reactive mode. And I also think that it really brings, you're talking about that focus or at that core, it also brings alignment with our key leaders in an organization. And that's really important because all of us can start off kind of, okay, yes, that is really important. But when we get caught up in the day to day, it's too easy with a team that I'm leading or a team that a colleague's leading or whatever, for us to be just ever so slightly off. And if we're not coming back and continuing to make sure that we're aligned on where we're going, it's that whole idea is that 1 degree over a long duration lands us in completely different places. And we got to make sure that we stay aligned. And so the strategic plan is a great opportunity to make sure that, hey, yes, we do have alignment when we set out, but then also that this is a live and active document that we're pulling out just to make sure, hey, we are still all seeing these as priorities, right? And are we aligned in terms of have we passed through these gates along the way yet? If not, why not? How do we continue to move that direction? And so I think that moving us away from just the reactive or the tyranny of the urgent, and then keeping us aligned and focused together as a team, I think is just a really powerful use of the tool.
And I think too, when you think about like future opportunities, like what should we consider? What shouldn't we consider? Like if we have had that strategic planning conversation, it might help us know the answer when that comes. So I was in a conversation recently around strategic planning where they were talking about the potential of an acquisition. And so to be ready for that, there's like, we need to have all the conversation. And it was actually about like, do we think someone would knock on our door to try to acquire us? And if so, what are we going to do? Right. And so let's have all those conversations, because you're right, Josh, that 1 degree of a lack of alignment. It can go, like you said, you end up in completely different places. So we talked how the tyranny of the urgent, the day-to-day, can really, be one reason why we never get to strategic planning. What are some other barriers or obstacles, or what else gets in the way and prevents people from taking the time?
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's just the reality of not setting aside the specific time to do it. And, we'll get to that, or trying to incorporate it within other regular routines of meetings instead of saying, this is important. How do we set aside time for this that looks different than a typical executive team meeting? But we're really dedicated to this time, and setting that up ahead of time, just really helps the team to be able to focus on this looks different. I have to come in with a different frame of mind, and preparation for it looks different. And then clarity on what is it that we're hoping to come out with. How's it going to look? What is our goal for this time?
Right.
I think a few different mindsets can play into this, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I think that a lot of times if we've been successful without a strategic plan, it by default leads to the question of, well, then why do we need a strategic plan? We've been successful up until now. And I think sometimes maybe an outgrowth of that can then sometimes be too, well, if we create a strategic plan, are we trying to make something happen, or are we trying to be somebody that we're not? Which we won't run down that trail, because there'd be a lot of good reasons to say, well, it certainly doesn't need to change who we are. I also think that if we tend to be strategically minded by nature, sometimes it can just feel like, well, isn't that what we do in our day to day? Like, isn't that why we hire good, competent people? They're strategically minded. Like, what is it and why is it then that we need to spend all this time, money, effort, in putting a plan together? Again, we've been good. Why is it that we would need to go down that path? And so,
it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Right. Yeah. And so again, I do actually think it's an interesting conundrum at times, that if we have been successful, the question being, well, should we have a strategic plan? That the answer should actually be yes, because I think a basic question would just be, well, do we know why we've been successful? And do we want to see that continued on? Are there things that we want to add to that? Are there things that we want to clarify? Or at minimum, like just codify? because there's going to be other leaders that come along who have not necessarily known intuitively
Right.
why we've been successful. And if we don't have a strategic plan, then we're somewhat left just to tell them, hey, just watch me. Right.
Right.
I hope just repeat.
Observe,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
observe things have gone well
Mhm.
to date. And it's like, well, how about a more disciplined approach? Doesn't have to change who we are, but I think that can be a stumbling block at times. Of it just doesn't feel necessary.
Right.
You know?
You also can have the reality of the opposite, where people have done strategic plans and haven't felt like they've been useful.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's just sat on the shelf.
Mhm.
I'm not doing that again. That was a lot of time and effort and resources, and we didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
And so we're not doing it again. And we just want to throw it out instead of saying, like, well, where in the process did you go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it wasn't that the strategic plan wasn't good. Maybe you just did not bring it into your practice regularly
Yeah.
to make it be beneficial.
So yeah, that's a really good point, Sally. Let's talk about that. Like, why is it? Because we've all heard that, and I don't know why, but it's always like a big fat binder, right? That sits on the shelf.
Yeah.
Why does that happen? So you mentioned maybe we haven't incorporated it into regular rhythms, but why else would we take all the time and then put these documents together so that we have that conversation recorded and then sit it on a shelf?
Well, you described it like we hear it being said often. It's this huge binder. So if it is a huge binder, it's too cumbersome. It's too
TLDR,
big.
right?
That's
Too long,
right.
I'm not going to read it.
Exactly. And it's not meaningful because we haven't actually honed in on what is most important, but we're trying to include everything.
Right, yeah.
So partially that is a reason. And then the other, I think too, is really how are you incorporating it throughout your natural rhythms, whether that's regular leadership team meetings, quarterly reviews. Do you have your metrics in there of your targets? Is the rest of the team informed? Or do just the executives know and nobody else knows how we're using it? And so all of those are little pieces that make it really meaningful or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point. And also, I think, too, that a lot of times we go in and the process itself can be set up to produce something that then feels like it's somewhat set in stone. And if a process has not evolved over time to allow a plan to be flexible and or live, let's just call it, right? Then in all likelihood, it will feel outdated in extremely short order, just with how rapidly our environments are changing. Be that business, be that nonprofit, it doesn't really matter. It's just the world around us moves so quickly. And so if we've come up with a process, we've gone through a process, and it produces this great looking thing that doesn't necessarily feel flexible, then actually in all likelihood, it will become a paperweight or just something that sits on the shelf because it doesn't answer the ongoing question then of, well, what do we do when some of the elements of that change? Why? Because they will change. Like some of our assumptions that happen there, if this is a 3-year plan, 2 years from now are likely going to be different. The technologies alone in which are going to be available to us or that we're, intersecting with could look completely different. And if that document is not flexible in its use internally, it's just going to be something that feels outdated almost the moment that we create it.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but that rigidity, like that's just not fun.
Yeah.
No.
Right? Yeah. Yes. You created, you took the time, you did really good work to develop that plan, but we all know that life is real. And I mean, you're right. Times change, industries change, new ideas happen. We're not even going to get into AI right now, but there's just all these variables. So when we think about strategic planning, are there any other trends or maybe new ideas that you've seen as we, work with different clients or just think about going about strategic planning? Like, have you seen anything kind of new and exciting or just different in the way of approaches?
I don't know that I'd necessarily say new or exciting, but I would say what is different from even 5 or 10 years ago is the reality that strategic plans are no longer 5 or 10 years.
Correct.
We're not creating a plan because we do see that things are changing so rapidly. So many more organizations are, 1-3 years at most. Now, some organizations have, specification, whether it's required, by the group that they're in or their board to have it a specific length. But most often we're seeing, smaller.
Yeah.
How are we making it more meaningful, shorter time period?
Yeah. I think that time period thing has changed. I mean, in almost every case.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that it was like a 5-10 year plan, and now seeing much shorter. Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things too that historically felt maybe a little bit cumbersome, at minimum, in some cases very cumbersome, that I've seen in a number of cases now, is getting input from a broader range of folks in the organization with things like online surveys, with focus groups inside of the organization, the use of technology just in capturing some of that broader voice has become something that is easier, and therefore I think we sometimes see more frequently. Whereas historically, to send out paper surveys to people, to tabulate all of the results, and it just felt ridiculous. And therefore a very small group of people would develop, the strategic plan, or the process felt very lengthy, in the whole grand scheme from start to finish. And so again, I think even the time frame has been compressed in the process itself of development, but also the including of kind of broader voices within that has been a really good thing.
Can you, either Josh or Sally, give me examples of how you've seen broader voices be included? Like when you say that, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it with, doing focus groups, gathering surveys, from your staff. Even I've been with some organizations where if it's something where they need to have expert opinions, they might bring in a panel of experts that are providing more input into what are they seeing broadly in the industry. So, we've seen that as another way to at least set a stage or a tone. And then, from there, they say, okay, now how does this information apply to us?
Yeah, that's good. That's what I was thinking of. Like, okay, focus groups, but who's in the focus group? So a survey might be a good way to get. We know, right? Most of our innovative best ideas come from the folks whose boots are on the ground every day. So, is there a way to pull that out? I also think a lot about advanced preparation. So I'm kind of walking into the next question, which is just what does it take for strategic planning to go well? So that was kind of the first thing, right? Can we have people come to strategic planning being prepared, having already thought about the answers to certain questions? What else would you add to that? What else does it take to have a process go well?
It's important to know your team. So not everyone thinks strategically naturally. And so you talk about that advanced preparation. Well, okay, if these are going to be the things we're going to talk about, let's give those questions ahead of time so there can be thought. Other people can, have dialogue more on the spot, but it gets down to just even nuts and bolts. Would we do well to meet offsite? Would we do well to have one full day? Or, hey, our team doesn't work so well in full day. They're going to be done after 4 hours. Is it better to break it into, 2 half days that might be back to back or a couple days apart so that we can have process time and thinking time to recap? All of those little pieces help to set the stage for the best outcome for your team.
And I think I'm picking up on something there, Sally. You wouldn't recommend like we have like a half day and then like you let 6 weeks go by and then another half day, right? You want a close enough rhythm that you can pick up where you left off.
You don't want too much gap in time.
Right.
Or we don't remember what were we talking about? Now we have to spend all this time, starting over. But there can be value in having some time in between because you're continuing to think about it. Or, hey, I gave that some more thought. Let's go back to this idea, or I'm thinking about it this way a little bit more. And so it allows just some break that you don't get when you're doing one full day. And there can just be sheer exhaustion from one full day too.
Right.
Yeah, I think the other things, and we'd probably name this across the board with clients, that we see strategic planning go really well with is we often talk about this with leadership teams or different teams internally, but the idea of rules of engagement can be really helpful, just of shared expectations, let's call them, so it doesn't feel as formal of a term. But to come in with the understanding of, hey, we all have the betterment of our organization in mind. And because of that, we are all going to share our opinions honestly with one another, and we're going to disagree with each other. If I hold a different opinion than you, Gina, or than you, Sally, I'm going to offer that respectfully, non-personal sort of way. But I'm going to be unapologetic of like, hey, I see what you're saying, but I'm not there. Because if it all comes back to what we talked about at the end, that this document is going to help answer how we get to where we're going, and we really do need alignment around it, then we can't put up a facade of, kind of like, I guess that sounds good. Well, am I and my team going to carry out then the goals that we have, in a shared way? We've got to be able to hash it out. And so that's going to look differently depending on the personalities of the teams, et cetera. But at bare minimum, we all have to agree with how we're going to interact while we're together. And the goal here is not groupthink. Right. Because if we want to be strategic, the goal is actually that we get the best ideas out on the table. We hash through them together and say, what's a realistic number of strategic initiatives that we can take on this year or these next 2 years, whatever it is. And that takes a lot of really open, honest discussion. If we're not going to have that, it's actually back to the whole idea of, if not everybody's bought into it, this thing is not going to take us nearly as far as what we would have hoped.
Yeah, it's a good
from
point.
the outset.
And sometimes to get to that, honest dialogue or even setting the stage, wouldn't you agree that having an outside facilitator can be really beneficial?
Yeah.
And that does not mean that a leader within the organization can't do it. But if they're trying to serve as facilitator of the meeting, and hey, I'm going to also share my ideas, you're sitting, on both sides. And so it's really important, I think, to be clear. Are you leading? Or are you going to be a participant and you're going to have someone else be the facilitator?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really hard to do both.
Yeah.
Right. And you're trying to like guide the conversation. You're trying to watch. Am I drawing out the quiet voices? Am I making sure there's not a loud voice that's just monopolizing an entire day or an entire topic?
Right.
Yep.
And so to that question, whoever's facilitating, like, do they need to be an industry expert?
No.
Yeah. Right.
No.
In fact, I do think that there can be scenarios where that's helpful in certain cases, but in general, the facilitation is really drawing out the expertise of those that are around the table. Specifically, they know their context better than anybody. They understand the day-to-day hurdles that are keeping them from where they want to go, et cetera. And it's really the drawing out of those things that is the most important quality of a good facilitator versus them bringing an expertise of the industry, because in some ways they can inadvertently supersede the other voices that are there that are really in their context going to need to discover for themselves what is the strategy that applies to us.
To Sally, your point earlier, when you think about who should participate in strategic planning, like if you want that industry expertise and what is it that we're not thinking about that maybe should be included, or we should be, trying to gather that information so we can evaluate it or wrestle with it as we create our strategic planning. I facilitated a strategic planning session where we basically put a panel together of industry, either partners or like the leader of their industry association, and it was a small panel, I think 3 or 4 people, but they had a couple of questions ahead of time. And then we walked through those questions. There was a bit of a Q&A at the end, so the strategic planning participants could ask those, again, if you want to call them industry experts, but that just created more information for them to wrestle with. So, yeah. So what would we say are some of the key elements of a good plan? Like what do we need? And that goes, I guess, way back to my first question is like people come in with different expectations of what the end result. Is it a 50-page document? Is it a 1-pager? Is it goals and action steps or strategic initiatives or directions? So what would you say are just some of the key components of a good plan, like the actual what's on the paper?
Yeah, I think you need to have that clarity up front of what is our outcome going to look like.
Yeah.
And whether you call it a strategic priority or a strategic initiative, it's neither here nor there, as long as you have agreement on what those terms are and what they mean. And so if people are interpreting those terms differently, that's going to create confusion. So at least within this group, in this setting, do we have common understanding of what each of these terms are? I think at a minimum, you do need to have some strategic initiatives. Obviously, that's the whole point of the plan. Those are those high-level big ideas of where we're focusing. And then you're starting to break it down into how are we going to measure that? What are going to be our goals and our metrics? And then at some point in that process, you need to be, assigning who are the owners of each of those.
Yeah.
If you leave that up to guesswork or assumption, you're going to leave that and say, well, I thought Josh was handling that. And you're 6 months down the road and Gina's like, Sally, I thought you had that.
Right. We could blame it on Daryl. He's not here. Right?
It has to have been Daryl's fault.
Of course
right?
it was, right.
No one has ownership of it, whether it's a person or a team. So we need to have, some definition so that when we're coming back and we're talking about it, we know who the point person is.
Yeah, those are really great points. And I think I'd add to that the idea as well from the outset of together understanding how long is this plan for is really helpful, because I think one of the key reasons that we would say you've got to define that 1, 2, 3 years, just as an example, is that also it helps us back into asking a really hard question, which is how many initiatives are realistic for us to actually accomplish in that time frame? Because one of the greatest discouragements of a strategic plan, and one of the things too that actually we will commonly hear as being something that people don't like strategic planning for, is you come up with this long list of good ideas or things that will help us get to wherever we're going. And a lot of those might be good things, but if we have a 1-year plan and we have 42 initiatives that we're trying to accomplish, we're not going to be able to do it, number one.
Right.
And number two, it's going to have the opposite effect. It's not going to be an encouragement to the team. It's going to be a discouragement. And we're just going to feel like, oh my word, we're laboring away. And I mean, we accomplished 13 things. That's awesome. We're not even close, and we're 10 months in. Like, we're going to fall so far short. So that's an extreme example. But the idea just being, hey, we've got to come up with a realistic number, and we need to together determine what that is. Because there's going to probably be more ideas on the table than what's realistic to accomplish. And sometimes that's a really great opportunity for a leadership team, executive team, whoever's involved, to actually put into action this idea of getting aligned. Because, okay, guys, we've got 18 things on the table. We have 2 years to accomplish them. We're a large organization. We've got a bunch of things already in the works. I think we've got to get this down to 8. Okay. How are we going to do that? And we're going to really need to press with each other, argue for our points on one hand, but at the end of the day, what's best for the company? And can we all come with that kind of one team perspective, which can just be a real driver to cohesion of a team.
Yeah.
And if you do have a multi-year plan too, then you're also identifying, are these year 1 or year 2 initiatives? Not everything has to be done from the get-go.
Which is often the default.
Yeah.
Like, we can do that next year. Oh yeah, we can get that done by.
Right. And then maybe you never get to it.
Yeah,
that's right.
But you're not only narrowing down how many, but you can also narrow down for what comes first and then what comes next.
Yeah. And to our earlier point about it should be a living document.
Absolutely.
Edit it. So strategic initiative number 8, like we're at the end of the year, it's not going to happen. Okay, well, it's probably okay. Let's give ourselves some more time, or whatever the adjustment is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think that on that point, so many times we need to go in with the mindset that if it's a living document, if one of them changes or we even remove it, that's not failure.
Right.
Because if something changed at the end of year 1, this is a 2-year plan, let's just say, and strategic initiative number 8 is basically obsolete because of some new technology that came into our industry, for example, it's better for us as leaders just to say, hey, that's gone. Here's why. Would we all agree with that? Great. Let's focus on the remaining, or maybe that has changed and here's how it changed. Great. those are the conversations that
Yeah.
can be really healthy as you move through it.
So two more things. One is just about communication. So we advocate for, if you want to have broader voices speak into the conversation, do that early. Do that on the front side. That's almost like your data collecting, whether it's the survey, whether it's focus groups, whether it's that industry expert panel. So then you work as a group, the leaders, executive team, whoever it is, you put your plan together. What do we do then, like about communicating the plan? We put it together, now what?
You need to go back out and communicate too. So I think there has to be different types of communication. So you may have your communication that comes from the primary leader or the executive team around, here's our high level view. Here's where we're going, create some excitement and momentum around that. And then you have some of your cascading communication that might occur at a department level that is, hey, here's how this applies to us. Here's what we're focusing on. Here's what our team is going to own. Here, we need your ideas to either flesh it out more or creating the excitement for the impact that they have. And that is ongoing. So it doesn't happen once. We know that about communication, and then you never circle back. But how are we continually coming back to say, we're identifying these things, we're making progress on them. Here's how we're making progress. Let's talk about the progress that we're making. Or it shifted. We got rid of that one. Here's why. And let's talk about what's happening in its place as well. Otherwise, it's like people are like, I thought we were doing that. Now, where are we going? And
right.
it
Leaves
just creates
people feeling
confusion.
confused and maybe even disenfranchised.
Yeah, well, and I love what you're saying too about the importance of circling back around to those people. And I think that as leaders, we often have to think about who is it that we're communicating with. So for example, if our process was 3 full days off-site, several states away, you get there, you're in a totally different, mindset. You walk through all of this conversation, perhaps material, perhaps research, whatever it might be. You put this plan together and then come back. It is so important as a leader to think about, how is it that I want to communicate to this audience?
Yeah.
What are going to be their questions? Because it's just too easy for us to make a whole bunch of assumptions that they have some baseline of the knowledge that we have, and that is probably not the case. Also, their interests or concerns in what we're about to share might very well be different than ours. And so putting ourselves in the shoes of whoever we're sharing this with, and I think that illustration of taking it back to specific teams is such a good one, Sally, because it contextualizes, what does this strategic plan mean for me?
Yeah, right.
And I think that if our people know that and we speak it in those terms too, of like, we realize this is going to have impact, we've thought that through, your team leaders are going to be sharing too as to, how this initiative impacts you all, yada, yada. That can just be really helpful. If we're speaking up here at 50,000 foot and our folks that are out on the front lines are like, what are they talking about? Or good for you. Like that. I'm sure that's interesting. I have no idea how my work connects to that. And actually the strategic plan is not achieving its ultimate goal, which is how are we as an organization coming together and moving in that common direction together.
Yeah. If you don't do what you just said, Josh, it's almost like you run the risk for the broader team to bump into 2 of the signs of job misery. And that's one, in measurement. So we've got this plan, but by the way, I know measurement's not really a word, right? But from the book, the 3 signs of a miserable job. If I don't understand how to contribute to the success, what success of that strategic plan looks like, well, that feels miserable. And if I don't understand how I fit in, that's irrelevance. Like, well, that's, like you said, okay, great. I'm glad you all have a good plan. I guess I'll go back to my desk or whatever. So, well, thank you so much. This has been super helpful. Was there anything that, I missed that we didn't talk about that we should, or any final words that you would have, or just any advice on, if someone's thinking about strategic planning, or even just a way to make a plan really come to life? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say is that so often organizations, if they're a little fearful of it, or they don't think it's necessary, or they don't know how to go about it, will then just not do anything at all. And, just jump in and start, and you can learn along the way.
Yeah.
We're here to help you or talk with others about how you can, get better at it. But if you start nowhere, you're certainly not going to be, proactive. You're just going to continue to be reactive. And so starting somewhere and learning, as you go is better than doing nothing.
Yep. Very
Well
good.
said.
Very good. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gina.